things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Did you know that we live in a world that's so concerned about specialty that you can get a coach for just about anything? I was looking it up this week about the different things that you might be able to hire a coach for in your own life. Now, of course, there are sports coaches. That's typically where we think of that language. But also, you can get a musical coach, a business coach. Pastors have coaches. You could hire a life coach. I think that's pretty funny, a life coach. You could get a career coach, a relationship coach. There is a TV show about a man you can hire to coach you how to own a dog right. You know who I'm talking about? Cesar Millan. He'll coach you to be a dog owner correctly. You can get a parent coach if you don't think that you're parenting very well. I wonder if Cesar Millan would make a good parent coach as well. Probably pretty similar. Coaches teach us how to do something, how to be something, how to become better at something. And in some ways, this series, we're going to be talking about action verbs, the action verbs that Jesus tells us to do and be. And Jesus, in a lot of ways, when he was alive, he worked closely with 12 young men. And he would teach them publicly when there was big crowds, but he'd also pull them aside and he would speak to them as well. And Jesus spoke in these strong action verbs. He would say things like, follow me, or he would tell people to love others. He would say that there were things you had to believe. He would tell you you had to go. He used words like wash and serve and love. All of these words were heavy, strong action verbs. When he was teaching, when he was coaching people how to live out their faith, he would use these strong action verbs. And I want to look at some of those together this next month. What are these action verbs that Jesus draws people in close to him and tells them to do things? Because if Jesus is a coach when he's discipling other people, he's giving them actions to do. Because for him, the faith isn't just a name. It isn't just a noun. The faith, living out this following of God, is a verb. It's about action. It's about what we do. It's about who we are. It's about where we go. I remember when I was a teenager, there was a Christian band called DC Talk, and they did like really bad rap. It wasn't like what you would buy at like Sam Goody, but it was Christian, you know, it was okay, it was decent. But I remember the song that I listened to in the 90s that I loved because it changed my mindset as a Christian. It was just entitled Love is a Verb. It's not the best song in the history of the world. If you didn't grow up in the 90s like me, you don't have to go look this up. You're not going to be wowed by the musicality of this song. But the title itself, Love is a Verb, was a profound concept to me when I was younger, because I would hear all of these things in the scriptures, and I would often think about them in just noun language. You become a Christian, you love, all these things are just like titles. And the idea that the Christian faith is something that you do, something that you embody, was profound to me even in my youth. And so today we're going to start with the idea of following Jesus, that it's time to follow Jesus. And we're going to talk about this specifically because this is what Jesus tells people to do, to follow me. And in fact, it's very early on in his ministry, well before miracles, well before big sermons with lots of crowds, that Jesus walks up to people and the instruction that he gives them is, follow me. And so we're going to read that story today in the Gospel of Matthew. It's in chapter 4, verses 18 to 25. And remember, as we read this, how early this is in Jesus' ministry. There's not a whole lot of track record. There's not a whole lot of gossip. There's not a whole lot of stories about who Jesus is and what Jesus does. Jesus comes rolling into town, and the very first thing he says, the first time he meets these young men, is follow me. And so would you stand with me as we honor the reading of the word of the Lord today in Matthew chapter 4, verses 18 to 25. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two others, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Jesus went through Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. News about him spread all over Syria, and people brought to him all who were ill and with various disease, those suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed. And he healed them. Large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan followed him. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. So Jesus begins his ministry by inviting people to follow him. And he goes up to fishermen of all people, Peter, James, Andrew, John. And he says to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. You will now fish for people. And there's something really interesting in the subtext of this text here that's worth noting, that these young men were in the fishermen's boats with their father. They weren't just out bass fishing with their dad, having a cold one out on the lake. This was the family business. This was the legacy of the father. These young men had gone off to school. Many of them had hoped that a rabbi like Jesus, a teacher, would choose them to be one of their disciples, that they would be elevated out of their common blue-collar working life, and that they would become somebody or someone. And instead, each and every one of these young men had been passed over and sent back home. And they were sent back home to a difficult trade. Chances are the fathers were happy that their sons had returned home. Chances were there's something to be said about your son being chosen by a rabbi to follow them, but also there's something even more to be said about the fact that I'm getting old, my back creaks, and a nice, young, strong man to help me out on the boat, feed the family. There's something more powerful about that. And so these young men had been rejected by rabbis and teachers in their Jewish schools, returned home and begun the family business. They had taken on their father's trade and begun the work of carrying on the family name. When Jesus shows up, looking like a rabbi, dressed like a rabbi, and he goes up to these men who had been rejected already and said to them, I'm going to give you a second chance. Why don't you follow me? And these young men looked at their fathers, looked at their future in the family business. They looked at the responsibility that was expected of them. Peter, we know, was married. He looked at his wife and maybe his kids, and all of them decided that they were going to leave it all behind and take the risk of following Jesus. Let's not miss just how scandalous this must have been, The idea of following Jesus wasn't just a mental assent, but it was actually taking the risk of leaving their life behind, leaving their responsibility behind, leaving what they owed to their literal father behind in order to follow Jesus around. And at this point, Jesus did not have a reputation or a following. It's after these young men decide to follow Jesus that crowds begin to gather around Jesus. It's after they take the risk of following Jesus that the crowds begin to show up. But as the crowds gather in, we should notice immediately that they are differentiated from disciples. The crowds are not the disciples. The disciples are the ones who leave everything and choose to follow Jesus. The crowds gather to watch from a distance. They're interested. They're fans. They're compelled. They want something of Jesus because they bring their ill and their sick and their disease and their demon filled. They bring them to Jesus, and Jesus heals them one after another. But we're not told that the crowds ever transition into disciples. They remain the crowd throughout the Gospels, all the way until the end of the Gospels, where we have on the one hand the disciples who follow Jesus through thick and thin, and the crowds who have always stayed near and watched and been interested. But when things get difficult and Jesus is dragged as a prisoner into Jerusalem, we're told with the same word, it's the crowd that yell, "Crucify him." And so we're differentiated early on. The hints are here for us to see that there are disciples who follow Jesus, and there is a crowd who is compelled by Jesus, interested in Jesus, a fan of Jesus. But the lives of a disciple and the lives of the crowd are two very different lives. And so we could begin to ask ourselves a context question of the gospel at this point. Who am I in relationship to Jesus? Am I like Peter and Andrew and James and John, that I would be willing to risk everything to follow Jesus? That I could change everything at the drop of a hat because I'm so compelled that Jesus is worth following? I would give everything to follow Jesus if that's what Jesus wanted of me. Or are we like the crowd, amused by who Jesus is, compelled by what Jesus says, interested in receiving the miracles of Jesus, but not actually willing to follow Jesus? Now, let's put that aside for just a moment, and we'll come back to it in just a little bit. But I want to talk a little bit about a pet project of mine. You see, we live in a world that loves leaders. Every time we go to any kind of conference for work or church or anything, it's all about how to become a leader. I remember when I was a child in school, we were told all the time, I would be sitting in this room of like 100 fifth graders, and someone would get up and talk to us and tell us about how we all needed to be leaders. And I would think that was so funny, because if we were all leaders, where are the followers? How can everyone be a chief? At some point, someone has to be a follower, right? And so we have really fetishized this language of leadership. But I'm always amused that at the heart of what Jesus' message is that he is the leader, and we are to be followers. And that is a complicated image for us Americans, type A, go-getters, win at all cost people, to be reminded that for just a moment in the presence of Jesus, we could set down our hurry to do and to accomplish and to win and even to lead. Because what Jesus asks us is for us to be willing to humble ourselves to the point that we would be a follower. And for me, this is always a hard thing to wrap my mind around, because I was taught from a young age to be a leader, to set the tone, to gather up people to follow me. But Jesus reminds us that our job is to humble ourselves and to follow him. And whatever it is about Jesus, we see these young men are eager to put it all behind and to follow him. Let's not minimize just how crazy this is. How many of us on Monday, if someone walked up to us and said, "Follow me," would close up our laptop and walk out of our office building and send our spouse a text message and let our kids know at school, "I'm about to follow this teacher. He's going to lead me all around the country. I'm going to walk, and we're going to go into new towns, and we're going to heal people." Can you imagine letting your family know that you would be willing to do this? It's wild just how much these young men are willing and ready to risk it all to follow Jesus. And so we might want to ask, what do they get for following Jesus? What exactly is it that they are in for? Jesus, this rabbi, walks up to them, says, "Follow me," and they say, "Yeah, sure. I'm all in. Let's do it. Where are we going? What are we going to be?" And so I began to think of these things that they might long for, because the things they long for may also invite us to scratch some itches in our own life as well. Following Jesus for these young men gives them purpose. Now, they had some purpose, but their purpose was mundane. It was just the day in, day out grind. But actually following Jesus, the one whom they would eventually call the Messiah, gave them a purpose that was beyond just their every single nitty-gritty day. They began to see themselves as different. They began to see God as different. And the work and the life that they lived had a purpose beyond just themselves. Now, we all long for purpose. Purpose begins to define the point of life. When we have purpose, we enter into days with more vigor. When we have purpose, we enjoy our work all the more. We're told from the time that we're very young to develop purpose and identity. And it's very difficult for many people. The reason we're taught this over and over and over is because finding purpose is elusive. And often we begin to take our idea of purpose and really merge it into other things, like my job. A lot of adults have a hard time differentiating their purpose from just the work that they do on a day-to-day basis. If you're a student, that might be where you begin to place your purpose. But if you just have these roles that you do that make you cogs in the machine, eventually we begin having this cognitive dissonance saying, I want to be more than just an accountant or an officer or an athlete, or I want to be more than this. I want to accomplish something. I want to do something for other people. I want people to remember my name. I want to leave a legacy. And these disciples follow Jesus because they want to be more than just a fisherman. They want to have a purpose that is outside of their day-to-day. Another thing they get in exchange for following Jesus is adventure. It's one thing to wake up every day, to get on a boat, to head out into the lake, to get food for your family and your neighborhood and come back day after day for the rest of your life. But Jesus is offering them an adventure. They're going to spend the next 3 years walking in and out of every town in the country. They're going to see some people excited to meet Jesus and other people who are angry to meet Jesus. One day, they will be welcomed into town like the Beatles, and then the next day, they will be kicked out of town like the Rolling Stones, right? They are going to see some things and experience some things in their life. After 3 years, they don't know this yet, but they're going to leave their home country and begin journeying all the way through the Roman Empire. Sometimes having their life threatened, and other times being welcomed as if their message is a balm that heals a people who are broken and hurting. Their life is going from mundane to adventure when they decide to follow Jesus. They also find that in following Jesus, they get mentorship. We talked earlier about coaching, but now they'll have a day-to-day coach with them. Jesus will correct them and encourage them. Jesus will tell them where they're missing what God is doing, and he'll invite them to draw nearer and closer to who God is and what God is doing. If you're going to be a fisherman, and your identity and your life is wrapped up into that, it's going to be difficult in the life of that life to figure out how to follow God more closely. But now they get to draw near to a rabbi, a teacher, who's going to help shape them and work with them and give them meaning and identity. They're challenged by Jesus. And of course, what they also get in exchange for following Jesus is an eternal reward. Following Jesus is something that will have no end. And this is going to be great for them because eventually their life is going to be threatened. It's going to be dangerous for them to follow Jesus. But if you begin to see that Jesus invites you to follow him, not only in this life, but that you are rewarded with a heavenly experience on the other side, when they start entering into towns that are hostile towards them, when people begin to threaten them, when death is threatened upon them, they can carry out their purpose and their call and their mission without fear. Because if you believe that there is an eternal reward for following Jesus, what does it matter if they kill you? Now, no one wants to die. I'm not encouraging you to put your life on the line necessarily. But when you become risky about following Jesus, when you might be willing to tell your faith at work or share what your hope is to someone who is hurting, when you're willing to be a little bit risky about following Jesus in a world that doesn't always look too kindly upon it, the worst anyone could ever do to you is kill you. But if you know Jesus offers you an eternal reward for following him, what are we afraid of? We begin to see that the rewards outweigh the risks of what following Jesus is like. And so I want to close today talking about a couple of stories of following Jesus. One is an older story and one is a current story. Because the idea of following Jesus is exciting. And I hope that we haven't gotten to the point that being a Christian is mundane. Because really there is an adventure and a joy and an excitement about choosing to follow Jesus. Choosing to follow Jesus isn't all risk. There's reward as well. The first story I want to tell you is about a place called Koinonia Farms in Georgia. This place, you can Google this and see that it still exists. But it was actually founded and created in the 1940s in southern Georgia. And there was a gentleman, his name was Clarence Jordan, a Christian man, who read the Sermon on the Mount and decided that he wanted to embody Jesus' most famous teaching. Coincidentally, the Sermon on the Mount is the very literal next words after the text we've read today in chapter 4 of Matthew. Once the crowds begin following Jesus, this is the teaching that Jesus does, the Sermon on the Mount. And Clarence read the Sermon on the Mount, and he thought, man, my life is so far from Jesus' vision and mission given to us in that sermon. So he decided he wanted to live it out in southern Georgia. And he purchased a farm, and one of the first things he did was that he wanted to make it interracial. He wanted black people and white people to come together, living out the values of the kingdom of God. And you might imagine in 1940s Georgia that this was not very well received. So the Ku Klux Klan starts bombing the farm, stealing their food. They would pick food and it would be stolen. People were terrorizing this farm because it was so outside of the day-to-day values of many people in southern Georgia. So Clarence turned to his brother, Robert. Robert was a lawyer, and Clarence begged Robert to begin to represent Koinonia Farms because people were suing them, the Ku Klux Klan was bombing them, and they needed representation because generally speaking, people weren't on board with what they were doing. And Robert said to him, you know, I can't represent you because I might lose everything. As a lawyer, he had aspirations. In fact, Robert would eventually become a state senator and a member of the Georgia Supreme Court. And when he said to his brother Clarence, I might lose everything, Clarence got really upset with him. He said, Robert, we might lose everything too. But Robert said, it's different for you. Clarence said, how is it different for us? You and I, we joined the church the same day. We heard the same message of Jesus. We were both asked before our church bodies, do you believe that Jesus is your Savior? And you and I both said yes, that we will follow Jesus. Why won't you help with this kingdom mission project? And Robert said, listen, man, I do follow Jesus, but I follow Jesus up to a point. And Clarence said, do you think that point might be the cross? And Robert said, yeah, that's right. I will follow him to the cross, but I'm not getting myself crucified. Clarence said, I think maybe that's the problem with us Christians today. We'll follow Jesus to a point. But Jesus himself says, follow me, pick up your cross, and follow me. That at some point we have to risk something. At some point we have to go to the next step of being more than just the crowd who stands off in the distance listening to Jesus and watching Jesus, but actually put some skin in the game and risk following Jesus. That our own plans, our own ambitions may have to take a step aside for us to become followers of Jesus. The other story I want to share with you is a story of one of the young adults in our church. And I'm going to invite him to come out here. He's going to share a little bit of his story. Josh Mesa is here. Josh was a former teen of this church who went off to the University of Maryland, studied. He's prepared now, just graduated from the University of Maryland, prepared now for a really compelling career. But God is working in his heart and his life, and he's really ready to risk something. So I want him to share a little bit of his testimony with you and about how maybe you could help him take this next step in his life.
Yeah, hi Crossroads. My name is Josh. I've been attending Crossroads since I was in 4th or 5th grade, so about 12 or 13 years ago. And if you don't recognize me, I've been away at college for the past 4 years, and I grew a beard, got into hats, so that might be why. I've been at the University of Maryland. I just graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering. And while at UMD, I got plugged into this ministry called Cru, or Campus Crusade for Christ, as it used to be known as. And Cru is all about winning, building, and sending. So winning college students over to the gospel of Christ, building them up in their faith, and then sending them out into the world as Christians. So what does it look like to be a working adult as a Christian and bringing your faith to the workplace? But Cru also provides opportunities for students to go abroad, to go overseas for a short period of time or a long period of time. So faithfully, after a lot of prayer, I've decided to say yes and go to the Middle East next year for a year. So I'll be leaving in August, and I'll be coming back in June next year. The specific city I'm going to is 99.97% non-Christian. So that means 3% of 1% of the population believe in Jesus and know who Jesus is. So this is a place that has little access to the gospel, a lot of unreached people. What I'll be doing, I'm actually blessed. I have a friend there right now. That's that bottom picture. His name is John. He's been there for the past year. He's about to come home. And he started out just going to English-speaking clubs at college campuses there and just playing basketball with some guys, just getting friendly, earning their trust, building relationships, to now, towards the end of the mission, he's started a focus group where people are coming in and bringing their friends and asking questions like, if Jesus really is who he said he was, why did he have to die on the cross? And it's that kind of curiosity and those kind of questions that build up faith and let people know who Jesus really is. So faithfully, I've said yes, but I'm not there yet, and I need help. I am in desperate need of prayer. I cannot do this by my own strength, and I'm nervous just being up here talking to you guys. So who knows what it'll be like down there. So I need prayer, I need financial support, and I need connections to people who I can share this story with. So if you're at all interested in joining my team or hearing more about it, I'll be in the back by the welcome desk, by the welcome area. I can answer questions. I would love to set up meetings with all of you guys one-on-one to be able to talk with you guys personally. If you're at all interested, let me know. And yeah, thank you, Crossroads, for giving me this platform to be able to talk about it. So thank you, guys.
Thank you. I'm so proud of Josh, and it's so exciting to see God working in people's lives. And it's exciting to see people take root of the concept of following Jesus, more so than just asking Jesus in your heart. That's an important step, but actually following Jesus. and following Jesus into places that are risky or uncertain. And the fact that he could get a job tomorrow and get going in life, but yet has decided to give this year of his life to sharing the gospel into risky places excites me so much. And I hope that you would join in helping support him, whether in prayer or financially as well. But also, the following of Jesus continues as well. And today, we're going to do baptisms of 2 different young adults in our church. And so to see God moving in young people's lives, and not just kids and teens, but actually adults who have finished college and are making next steps in their lives, whether it's Josh or Alyssa or Fideli who's getting baptized today. And so would you join me in celebrating what God is doing in even more people's lives as they're taking their next step to follow Jesus?
Well, church, we're very excited today to be baptizing